Hi everyone, my name is Shrumi, welcome to my channel. So this video is about canonically autistic characters, and it's kind of a follow-up to my previous video in which I talked about characters that I had canon as autistic. But before we get to the video, I have a couple of news. Firstly, as some of you may have noticed, I changed the name of my YouTube channel. It used to be Shrumi Talks Art and Activism, which was about 5 too many words, and now it's Shrumi's Artivism, which is nice and simple. And also, if you search for artivism, then you find some really interesting videos about how you can turn art into activism. And that's the kind of crowd that I want to hang out with. And then the second super exciting thing is that I will be making a comic for an autistic comic anthology called Sensory: Life on the Spectrum. I didn't participate in the original project, but they opened pitches for extra pages and mine was chosen. So that is really exciting. It's also partially why I'm posting this video a little bit later than I hoped, because making pitches and then making some other stuff for it just took up some time, and I just got a bit stressed out in general. Anyway, this is a really cool project. It's a comic anthology featuring comics by over 30 different autistic creators. They're all kind of about our personal experiences of living as autistic people in a world that doesn't always accept us. So this will be a 140-page hardcover book. So if you would like to get the book for yourself, you can head to our Kickstarter, which I will link in the description. And you can grab yourself either a digital copy or a physical one. You can also get some merch, such as stickers, prints, t-shirts, acrylic pins, phone wallpapers, coloring books, bookmarks, and more. Oh, and also you can get your name printed in the book, of course. So if you're interested, do check it out. Also, if you don't have money for the book, then most of the comics are available on Twitter under the hashtag ASDComicTakeover. Some of us are also doing a Q&A podcast, and we'll be uploading that to YouTube. So once it's on YouTube, I will put a link in the description, and also in the little card right on this video. By the way, my comic will be on the topic of representation in media, and on that note, let's get back to the video. So the first character I'll be drawing today is Rick Sanchez from Rick and Morty. And yes, indeed, he is canonically autistic. One of the creators of Rick and Morty, Dan Harmon, is also autistic, and I think he found out about it during his work on the show, and I guess they decided that it fit Rick too. So Rick and Morty is an animated TV show about Rick, who is kind of a mad scientist person, and his grandson Morty, and they have various intergalactic adventures together. But it's kind of, I would say, a dark comedy, so there's a lot of pretty gross and depressing humor happening. And Rick himself is not exactly a very positive example of an autistic person, I would say. Like, he's just not a very nice person. He has a very unpleasant, abrasive personality. He thinks he's always right, he thinks he is the best, and pretty much views everyone else as beneath him because he's a genius. He also has no regard for the personal boundaries of other people such as his family, or Morty, whom he drags on adventures and forces him to do things he doesn't want to do. And at the same time, he's always preaching about how everything is meaningless on a cosmic scale and how love is just a chemical reaction and how there's no point in getting attached to people and stuff like that. He's also a huge alcoholic, so he's basically just like drunk most of the time, but at the same time, he's the super genius scientist, and he keeps inventing cool things that can open portals to other worlds, and there's a lot of excitement that he brings into the lives of his family, but most of his actions are ultimately selfish and are just to entertain him. He's extremely impulsive and acts on his own whims, expecting Morty to just follow him and do whatever he says, not really thinking about how Morty might feel about that. When it comes to him being autistic, I can definitely see that, but I kinda have mixed feelings about him being labeled as such, because I feel like we really are lacking in representation that is varied and positive. And I find that a lot of characters, at least that are commonly perceived as autistic, or that are canonically autistic, fall into the same tropes, and Rick kind of continues that legacy, so there's like genius, scientist thing, and also the whole being a terrible person who is very difficult to live with. I wouldn't want people to think that all autistics are like that. But we could definitely hypothesize why he is such a wreck, what compels him to act this way. And I think being autistic could definitely contribute to his sense of isolation and otherness from everyone else. That is something that I can relate to. His usual explanation, if you can call it that, for being an overall unpleasant person and not really caring about other people's feelings is that he is just too smart and too genius, and therefore he has a principle to never be nice to people because only stupid people are nice, am I right, lads? And he sees pretty much everyone as inherently inferior to him because they're not as smart as him, which has also caused a bunch of interesting fanbase memes, because Rick and Morty fanbase is pretty infamous for missing the point by actually idolizing Rick and thinking that he's supposed to be some sort of role model, when in fact he is obviously an anti-hero and not someone that I would want to be like. But then sometimes he shows moments of vulnerability, but he keeps kind of zigzagging between caring and not caring. There's a really good video series by The Take that I watched in this, so I will link that in the description because I think they explained it way better than I can. But when it comes to autistic traits, I think I don't disagree with it. But I think that it's not by far the most important thing about his character. There's so much more to consider there, like his alcoholism, his depression, but also why he has them. Because of his research, he's learned to open portals and he learned that there are infinite versions of all universes and therefore there are infinite versions of himself and his family. And that sort of existential discovery can make you feel quite indifferent to everything because it means that pretty much everything in your life is inherently replaceable. I don't know if making him canonically autistic is a good thing or a bad thing for autistic people. To be honest, I don't think that many people will notice it because it was quite a subtle scene, but I personally appreciated it precisely because Rick and Morty seems like the kind of show with the kind of fanbase that would use autism as an insult, and in fact that is seemingly what was about to happen in the scene. So for copyright reasons and personal convenience reasons, I'm not going to include the scene by itself. Instead, I'm just going to recreate it in my own voice, so enjoy my Rick and Morty voice acting, I guess. Okay, so imagine Rick and Morty sitting on a couch playing Minecraft, and Rick is just mining and crafting and mining, and then he's like, "Is this game popular with autistic people?" And Morty's like, "Why would you say something like that?" And he looks visibly upset, and Rick is like, "'Cause I'm starting to love it." And then Morty smiles, and then it's wholesome. I really like this scene. It makes me so happy because it feels like they're about to make an ableist joke. And don't get me wrong, this show does have some ableist jokes, mainly also from Rick, who, for example, insists that he can use ableist slurs because why not? But this was a nice one. I like how he turned it around. And I don't know, maybe it would be actually beneficial to some rabid Rick fans who think that he is the best, because actually he's autistic, and that's not a bad thing. Or at least out of all the things Rick is, autistic is like the least bad one, I think. Anyway, when I drew this, my friend was kind of surprised because they said they didn't expect to see Rick in a t-shirt that says "Cure Ableism." But my response to that is that, firstly, I wanted to, and secondly, if there are infinite universes and infinite Ricks, then surely there's an autistic anti-ableist Rick somewhere in one of those universes, so just let me have it. Alright? The second canon autistic character for today is Entrapta from She-Ra and the Princesses of Power, which is also an animated TV show, and the reboot of an old cartoon called She-Ra Princess of Power, except with all the characters redesigned and the story rewritten and stuff like that. And I love Entrapta. She is amazing. But surprise surprise, she's also a genius scientist person. And I love her, but I'm getting a little bit tired of this trope. I have nothing against it, I just think that it would be cool if there were also some popular autistic characters that were not that. So the plot of She-Ra takes place on a planet called Etheria. I like that it's not Earth, even though it's kind of earthy, but it's still refreshing. And it's kind of a sci-fi fantasy sort of setting. Everything is called very silly things in this, okay? You'll just have to deal with it. So the main conflict of the story is between a group known as the Horde, who live in a place called the Fright Zone, which, as the name implies, is kind of a scary place where evil prevails. And they want to conquer Etheria and enslave everyone and stuff like that. Just, like typical evil things. And on the other side of the conflict are the native people of Etheria, who are represented by princesses, because there's a bunch of different kingdoms, and princesses basically rule them, but also princesses possess magical powers, which come from runestones, which are magical crystals. So Entrapta is the princess of Drill, which is the most technologically advanced kingdom in the whole of Etheria. And her magical power actually doesn't come from a runestone, it just exists. I don't know how it works. But her magical power is that her hair is kind of alive and she can use it like extra limbs. And it is very useful since she is an engineer and an inventor. So it basically means that she has several pairs of extra arms to do everything for her. And she is canonically autistic. She was largely written by an autistic member of staff, according to the creator, and that person played a big role in what she became like, so they decided to write her like that. And it shows. She shows a number of autistic traits. For example, she likes to use her hair to do things rather than her actual arms. She makes a chair using it, she walks using it, she often uses it instead of her hands to manipulate machinery, which could point to sensory problems. She's also very particular about food, which again is a common autistic trait, sensitivity to food textures and appearance and stuff like that. She only eats tiny food and only drinks fizzy drinks. And this isn't confirmed, but I personally had to have ADHD as well as autism, because she has a very short attention span for pretty much anything that isn't her special interest, which is tech. But again, that can be common in autistic people who hyperfixate on one thing, and in some of us it's more extreme than in others. But a lot of us, especially when consumed by a special interest, can completely disregard whatever's happening. I noticed Entrapta also happy stims when she's excited a lot, and she is often excited. I would say that overall, she is definitely a more positive depiction than Rick, with some caveats. I think she does somewhat fit the trope of autistic savant, or idiot savant as it's also called sometimes, which basically means that, yeah, she is a genius and she is extremely intelligent, extremely knowledgeable about Etheria, about technology, about how to combine magic with technology, but she is not very good at social interactions or paying attention to pretty much anything else. She is very, 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 very hyperfixated on her research and on science, and that causes her to pretty much disregard most other things that other people care about. Even when it comes to life or death situations, she can get distracted super easily by anything she sees as fascinating. What I do like about her though is that she's very positive and generally a very friendly character, but that also makes her easy to manipulate, because she sees something shiny and interesting that she doesn't understand, she wants to understand it, and then she just forgets about everything else that was going on. If there's a giant robot spider chasing her that wants to kill her, she is a knowledge in danger, but also the robot is very interesting, so she wants to approach it and take it apart instead of run away, and stuff like that. She is just infinitely curious, infinitely dedicated to science. She never feels discouraged if an experiment fails, because there's always data, and she loves data. Overall, I really like the reboot of She-Ra. I really like how they redesigned the characters. I like how Entrapta is canonically autistic. There's also a canonically non-binary character that goes by they, them pronouns, and I love them. There's also quite a lot of diversity in terms of body type, skin color, and stuff like that. And there's a lot of gay stuff. It just has everything. Everything that people in conservative countries want children not to see. And obviously everything that I want children to see. It's great. I love it. I've been rewatching it and it's so enjoyable. I just kind of wish I was a kid now, just so I could experience it. I'm really happy for the children who are experiencing this now for the first time, because, wow. Anyway, this is how she turned out. I used all of my alcohol markers. So Uhuhu, Copic, Promarker, all of them. And I also used a bunch of sparkles on her, and that made me want to draw Glimmer, who is my fave, and she looks like me, so that's a big bonus. I love that she's round, like me. So I might draw Glimmer at some point, and maybe other characters from She-Ra. Let me know if you would like someone in particular. And yeah, in this house we love and appreciate Entrapta. The last character I'm going to talk about is probably the drawing that took me the most time, definitely the one that has delayed this video the most, because at first I was just going to draw the character in a very simple manner, just her child self standing with her platypus toy. However, that didn't happen because I like to make my own life difficult, and I just came up with this really intense composition, which is what you'll be seeing in this video, which took me many hours even just to plan, but also to do justice to it in general. But I hope that the wait is worth it. Now, one thing to note is that this part will contain some medium level spoilers to the game, because it is not really possible to talk about this character in the first place without spoiling a little bit of the game. However, I will avoid heavy spoilers, so if you have not played or experienced To the Moon, then I think it should still be okay for you to watch the rest of this video. But just be mindful, if you absolutely hate any, even the slightest spoilers, then, well, I guess then you wouldn't be listening to this video in the first place, would you? Anyway, I will try to avoid any really major spoilers about the plot. To the Moon is a game about two doctors trying to fulfill an old man's wish. Sounds wholesome, doesn't it? Well, what if I told you that the man was dying, and the way to fulfill his wish is actually to implant him with artificial memories that override his real memories about what happened in his life? That is exactly the service that Zygmunt Corp provides, which is the organization that the two player characters, Neil and Eva, work in. So yeah, their job is to basically override the memories of people on their deathbed who are dissatisfied with how their life turned out, and so they want to fix that by fixing the memories, and then they can die happy. So that's the premise of the game, and that's basically what you set out to do. Your client is a man named Johnny, and he wants to go to the moon, but he doesn't know why. So in order to make him go to the moon, they have to enter his memories and then go all the way back to his childhood, figure out why he wants to go to the moon, and imbue childhood Johnny with the desire to go to the moon, and then run an algorithm to make that happen. Anyway, the autistic character in this game is River, and she's definitely one of the most significant characters in this game and why things happen the way they happen. And she is canonically autistic, although the game doesn't explicitly mention autism. It doesn't say the word. However, it talks a lot about the condition. They just call it the condition, which actually is a little bit annoying because I don't see a reason to be that secretive about autism. But it does mention Tony Atwood, who is an expert on the condition, and if you Google Tony Atwood, then you'll see that he is an expert on, well, specifically Asperger's syndrome. But at the moment, it's all just called autism spectrum condition, so basically, he's an expert on a subtype of autistic people. I would say that her autism definitely is one of the important threads that run through the whole game, and trying to understand her is important. So where do we start with River without spoiling too much of the game? Well, let's just go over some of her autistic traits. One of the significant items in the game, or mementos, which is what you use to leap between memories, is her stuffed toy platypus, which she has been carrying around ever since she was a little kid. Many autistic people become attached to a so-called comfort object, and very often it is a plush toy. Secondly, there's a particular book that she is always reading throughout her life, which is The Emperor's New Clothes. And I find that a really interesting choice of book, because she says that she enjoys it, but for different reasons. And this is purely speculation, because this isn't really elaborated upon in the game. But considering that the game sort of has a theme of trying to understand other people, but also the desires of neurotypicals versus the desires of autistic people, it makes sense why she would like this book, because I think The Emperor's New Clothes is often how it feels to be autistic in a neurotypical world. I find that neurotypical people often play by their own rules and they're not necessarily logical. So sometimes it does take an autistic person to say, "Your king is naked, by the way." And then everyone's like, "How could you say that?" Well, it's obvious, but everyone's just too polite to say it. But autistic people often don't mince words, and we just say things how they are. For example, this is a complete tangent, but just to bring a real-life example, the climate activist Greta Thunberg is autistic, and she has said before that she thinks her being autistic is what actually makes it possible for her to go out and just call out world leaders and call out the system like this, and just to say things very bluntly, like, "We are in a crisis, our house is on fire, we need to fix this now. And the only way to fix this is by stopping burning carbon, and by leaving oil in the ground and stuff like that." Her autistic bluntness is what lets her see things in, some people would say, in black and white. But in this case, it's kind of a necessary type of black and white. She isn't concerned with being polite to people or with trying to not hurt people's feelings, she just says it like it is. Which is exactly what we need, I think. Anyway, tangent aside, another thing with River is that her communication style is very interesting, and I find it really charming actually that the little details in the game really show that she was written by someone who, well, at the very least understands autism. I don't know if any of the creators are autistic themselves. But for example, in her sprites, when people talk to her, she often averts her eyes, while the other characters don't, and that is relatable. Because one of the common autistic traits is not really making eye contact. She also takes things very literally, and she often doesn't really understand social cues. For example, one of my favorite scenes is when a boy invites her to see a movie together, so obviously he's inviting her on a date. So he expects that she will meet him there and then they will sit next to each other and stuff. So he comes into the theater and she isn't there. And so he thinks that he must have been stood up and she just didn't come. But he decides to go see the movie anyway, in case she's just late, and then see if she shows up. And then she doesn't show up and he decides to leave. So he comes out of the theater and just sits outside being sad. And then River comes out also of the same theater and he's like, "Wait, what, you were here the whole time?" And she's like, "Yeah, you invited me to see the movie and I said yes." And then he's like, "Wait, what? But I invited you to see a movie together." And she's like, "Yeah, well, we were seeing it together, we were in the same room watching the same movie at the same time." And yeah, I have to say that not all autistic people would misunderstand the situation to this degree, but she does, and I'm sure there are other people who also would. And I just find that so charming. I just thought it was a very cute scene, personally. What else? This is also somewhat of my own interpretation because, again, the game kind of leaves things open for interpretation quite a lot. But one of the way River communicates is, instead of saying things, often autistic people find it difficult to communicate with words. She will communicate through art. For example, making origami is something that she does a lot. And in particular, she makes a lot of paper rabbits, which have significance, but I'm not going to tell you what it is because spoilers. Silly me before I replayed the game, which is something I did for the sake of this video because I didn't remember it too well. I misremembered and thought she was making cranes, so I even made an origami crane myself just to reference it to make sure I don't mess it up. And then I started replaying the game and it was rabbits and I was like, oh, whoops. But I also didn't want my cute little crane to go to waste, so I put some origami birds in the sky instead of actual birds. Origami birds are easier to draw as well, so that was good. Oh, and finally, River has a strong special interest in lighthouses, which is also a big recurring theme throughout the game. So yeah, I think overall she's a really well-written autistic character. Obviously she can't represent everyone. There is another autistic character in the game as well, who is somewhat of a foil to River, although she isn't such a major character. One thing I really like about River is that I would say, she doesn't follow the same tropes as, for example, Entrapta and Rick do. So if we compare her to the other characters in this video, then she's not a tech genius, she's not really depicted to be a genius in general, although she does have very strong rote memory, so she can memorize entire passages from books and stuff. Apparently, I don't remember doing that, but my cousin told me that when I was little I was doing the same thing as well. That if she would ask me a question, I would just recite like an entire page from a book, and she was like, whoa. There's a type of memory called rote memory, which has to do with repetition, and the game does mention that a lot of autistic people have strong rote memory. And I think for me, I can kind of relate to that because, well, that was that thing that my cousin claims I used to do. But also in Estonian school we have to learn a lot of things by heart, for example poems. That's a pretty big thing. Apparently not as much of a thing in other countries. And I was kind of lazy about that in high school. But also I didn't really need to, as long as I wasn't called first. If there were a couple of people before me, I could just listen to them recite the poem and also read the poem at the same time. And then about 2 times was usually enough for me to memorize it, and then I would just go and recite it and get an A. But anyway, another tangent aside, River's not a genius, she's not really a tech person, she's not an autistic savant, and I find that she's probably a little bit more realistic in some ways than those other characters. However, that is in itself a flawed statement, because all autistic people are very different. They always say that if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person, and I think that is very true. And so when it comes to representation in media, what I want to see most of all is variety, because we're all so different. Some people even say that autistics are more different from each other than neurotypical people are different from each other, which is an interesting statement. I don't know if I agree or if there's been any research on that, and I don't even know how you would measure that, but yeah, that's the thing. Overall, I think River was one of the first, if not the first, canonical autistic character that I learned about, because I first became familiar with this game quite a few years ago, again when I was a teenager. That's when I started being into the RPG Maker scene, because it is made with RPG Maker XP, which is quite amazing because I feel like this game kind of really pushes the engine to the limit. There isn't that much gameplay other than some puzzles, but it is a very beautiful game. I thoroughly enjoyed my replay of it, and I would definitely recommend it, definitely worth the money. It's just under £7 or so, and when it goes on sale it's obviously even cheaper. So yeah, highly recommend. It also has a sequel called Finding Paradise, which follows the same 2 doctors, Eva and Neil, but with a different client. And there's also an upcoming game called Imposter Factory, which I am very excited for. And they also have some free games on their website as well. Some of them are in the same universe and touch upon some of the characters from the paid games, and some of them are just separate ones. But yeah, I really love and really highly recommend Freebird Games' work. It will probably make you cry a lot. I'm not a very sensitive person when it comes to media, but even I am a little bit like sniffly when it comes to the Moon and the other games by them. Well, I hope I didn't spoil too much of the game. If you want to find out why Johnny actually wants to go to the moon, what is the significance of all these little things that I put into this illustration, then you'll have to play the game, I'm afraid. And yeah, this illustration does depict River and also herself. Just, let's just say different versions of her, which are both beautiful in their own way. At first I was just going to draw her as a child, put her little plushie because she looks adorable, but then I googled some other fanarts of her because there isn't really a canon illustration other than one from behind. So I was curious how other artists interpreted her, but then I just saw that everyone, like literally everyone, was drawing her exactly like this version of her, and I thought I can do something more interesting surely. And then I came up with this whole concept, and then it just got out of control because I spent so much time on it. But I hope that the final result is nice to look at. Yeah, I spent a lot of time, I know, way too much time than I expected to working on this video, but I really hope that you've enjoyed it, and I hope that the wait was worth it. I also kind of plan to do another video in which I use every Write art supply to draw something for Write Instead, which is the Autism Acceptance Campaign. However, I don't know if I will do that at the moment, because I'm kind of exhausted. And also, it's not really Autism Month anymore, and also there are some other things that I want to make videos about as well. So we'll see. I might stash this idea for later, and just do other things for now. I might also take a break from YouTube in general, because I really want to finish Shroom Soup, which is my game development project that has been going on for like many years now. And the reason it's been going on for so long is that I can't just sit down and do one thing. I always have to do like a trillion million different hobbies and volunteering things and other stuff. So I'm just a bit all over the place as a person in general. Another thing is that this whole idea that I have to upload videos every couple of weeks in order to grow my channel has been just really stressing me out. And so I think I'm going to just stop doing that for the time being and just upload whenever and be that type of chaotic creator. So if you want to never miss a video, then maybe you should click that bell button, which should be somewhere right next to that subscribe button, which you should also click if you have enjoyed this video and would like to see more stuff from me. And somewhere just below those, there's also that like button. Also click that, please, that really helps me out. And there's also a comment button, which you can press too, although you have to type a comment first. But if you did that, that would make me super happy because I worked super hard on this video, and I would love to hear your thoughts on it. And yeah, thank you very much for watching, and thanks everyone for the support. Oh, but wait, before I go, once again, check out our Kickstarter for Sensory. There's only a few days left as of posting this video, so if you would like to grab the book or merch, then you should do it right now. Otherwise it will be gone, and then you might be sad because you didn't get to get an awesome comic anthology of over 30 autistic creators, which will support us and make us happy, and yeah. And check out our Q&A as well. Anyway, yeah, so now that I've plugged all the things, I can finally go to rest. God, I'm very tired. Also, I'm sorry about my voice. I'm kind of sick right now, so it's kind of cracking all the time. My apologies. So, yes, thank you very much for watching. This was Shroomy, and I will see you later at some point. Bye bye!